Hey everyone, welcome back to Getting in a College Coach Conversation. We're having a lot of fun today because we are kind of nerds, the three of us, and we're discussing a book. So that's great. It's Who Gets In and Why, A Year Inside College Admission by Jeffrey Selingo. We've already talked a little bit about some of the philosophy he has around the college search. We dove into the ED process a little bit. And now we're just going to talk about the book in general, sharing some of our thoughts about it. So Sally, why don't you go first and just speak to the book itself and what you found to be helpful or good about what you were reading.
What I think is going to be most helpful for families is just how he contextualizes how and why colleges are making different decisions. That it's not about, this is completely understandable, but students and parents are just thinking about, is my kid good enough to get in? And what they're not thinking about, what they can't really think about because they haven't been there, is that colleges are trying to craft a class, and they're thinking about and dealing with all kinds of institutional priorities, right? And he even says, for example, I want to make sure I get this right, that colleges are dealing with some pretty big tensions too when they're making decisions. So for private, it's often a tension between full pay students and low income applicants. They might have a very strong low income applicant, but if that applicant cannot pay very much, that student might be gone in favor of a full pay applicant who's nowhere near as strong. Now, I want to make it clear that, again, I am not talking about these top tier wealthy schools, but that's much more common what you're going to see at a lot of these schools. And at public, the big tension is between in-state and out-of-state students. So just know that they're grappling with these really tough numbers that are not always going to be transparent. And then they also have to think about how many athletes are they going to admit? Like, there's just so many different institutional priorities. How many people from the Dakotas? How many people here? And I think some people have a sort of basic understanding of it, but Selingo goes into it in some pretty decent detail. So I think families that want to get a broader understanding, Selingo's book is going to be really helpful.
That's great. Shannon, what about you? What were some of your big takeaways from the book?
Yeah, I think it will be very helpful to families who are trying to understand this process. It was helpful for me, among the three of us. I'm the outsider here in that, I know about college finance and I know about enrollment management in general, but I did not know the specifics of what goes on in those admissions committees. So it was really enlightening and kind of fascinating to me. Some of the stuff, I know that colleges have to shape their class, but the number of times students are, kind of, if this is accurate, you guys can tell me, sort of conditionally accepted. We think this one's going to be accepted, but we now realize we have too many conditionally accepted. So now we've got to pull a whole bunch out, but now we realize we don't have enough English majors or athletes or legacies, and we have to shuffle the class. People can be in and out and back in, and you never know. You get the acceptance letter or the rejection letter, and you kind of never know maybe how close you were to get. You almost got in, or you almost didn't get in. So I thought that part of it was just fascinating. But the basic kind of message about how the admissions process is often more about institutional goals than your worth as a student, and helping families to understand that message, I think is just really valuable. And I think that he does a great job of illustrating it.
You're totally right. I'm a little mad at you because when Sally was talking, I wrote down shaping a class because I was reminded that I thought that was so helpful.
Yeah.
And I think that big takeaway is actually quite huge. A lot of students think, all right, I'm sending this application off to this school that I've researched and I really like, and I want to see if they like me. And it is not that at all. Because you can even be in situations where they did like you, but you can't get in. And there are a couple of examples from schools where it's like, well, we've got to pull down, which means we've conditionally admitted a certain number of students. We have to pull down 1,000 students by the end of the week. And so they're reading and they say, well, I really like this kid, good kid, great grades. And somebody else says, well, we don't have room for them. And so they get pulled out of the class. And I think that clarity around what is really happening there can hopefully help to bolster some of the students that are feeling rejected by a process where their application was denied, but they have not been rejected. And so you really see some of that is laid bare in this book. And hopefully, what it can do is it can either help families to better understand what that process is, but also maybe make them a little bit mad at some of these top schools in a way that allows them to broaden their horizons a little bit more. I love the insight, just for our listeners who haven't read this. He spent some time with the University of Washington admission office, Emory, and Davidson, and really gets to see what they actually are doing when they are making their decisions. And that is pretty cool stuff. I don't think it's helpful at all in terms of what your application will look like ultimately, but it is interesting just to know what it looks like. Do we feel like there are pieces of advice throughout this book that are worthwhile for a student who is looking to improve their application, or is it just informational about sort of what the process looks like?
Yeah, I think that there's definitely some good advice. I mean, he's more trying to give a broader picture, but throughout there, I think that he really is giving some pretty concrete advice, like give yourself some time to figure things out. Don't automatically go for early decision. In terms of how to craft your application, try and be your authentic self, but also give the admission officers a lot of detail about who you are. Like he shows some examples about missed opportunities where students don't fill out the extracurricular activity list
Right.
very well. Mind you, I don't think that's a common problem for students who are applying for the drivers, but for passengers that can be a big issue. So he gives, like, those are just a couple of the pieces of advice that he gives that I think are really helpful.
Yeah. Shannon, what do you think? Is this something that, I mean, it obviously, you're a curious person. You found it to be interesting from that standpoint.
Yeah.
Did you feel like there was good advice to be had in here as well?
Yeah, I think so. And the biggest piece for me was not necessarily advice as to how to shape your college application, but more in how to shape your college search process. And his advice to students to create their own criteria for what they're looking for in a college. Do not go based on what the colleges think you should do and what the college marketing departments tell you are important. Don't go by what US News and World Report tells you is important. Don't go by what your friends and neighbors tell you is important in a college. Create your own criteria. Yeah. And that will, if you do that, that will get you out of this loop of this endless drive for prestige and the stress and the insanity that it puts families under. If you can step out of that, and I think that this book will help a family to step out of that and create your own criteria, I think that will be phenomenally helpful in a college search process.
And that feels like stepping out of that is really something the whole family has to do, because there are some great examples in here of parents being a little bit more kind of down to earth, but students pushing for prestige. Yeah. And then you see other situations where the students are a little bit more fair-minded about what they're considering, but the parents are pushing for prestige. What's really interesting, there are 3 students that he actually follows from start to finish in their research process throughout this book. And 2 of the 3 of them are sort of unhappy by the end of the process, not perfectly satisfied with where they came out. One of them got into exactly the school that he wanted with the aid that he needed, and is still kind of like, well, this isn't what I thought it was going to be. Another student had to settle for what she felt was a safety school and hadn't done full research to really feel like she was connected. And a third student went to a school she had always resisted and discovered that it was a wonderful experience for her, and it was as good as what she was anticipating at an Ivy League school. So I think it's really, when you imagine yourself in college, if you're sort of getting into this idealistic mindset about being at a particular place with a particular kind of experience only at that place, it can really sour you on whatever your experience will be when you actually start, even if you end up at that school. Yeah. Because if that experience is not exactly what you imagined it would be, it's going to feel wrong somehow. And so you almost have to stop yourself from rushing in and saying, this is what I think my college is going to be like at this particular school. You've got to be a little bit more patient, I think. And the book really conveys that through the use of those case studies. So are we all in agreement that we like this book?
we got some nods. That's good.
Yes.
Any other
thumbs up.
takeaways that we would want the listeners to hear about?
I mean, I like that he tried to emphasize being authentic. Like, give the
Yeah.
colleges enough information about who you are, but don't try to be somebody who you aren't.
We've
thought
said that
that
on the show before, I feel like. Is that?
Yeah, well, it's actually
Once or twice.
I saw it on television. I said it on television once. So
Perfect. So yeah, we really enjoyed this, and this was fun. I know we had to push a little bit to read. It was like, oh my gosh, we committed to reading a book and discussing it on our show. But if you like this kind of a segment, we stepped a little bit outside of our typical advice for families. And so if you like this kind of conversation, let us know. You can send us an email at gettingin.voiceamerica@gmail.com. You can always leave a comment on our social media if you're watching this video, or if you're not watching this video and you want to go find us on Facebook and give us a like and tell us that you enjoyed the conversation, we'd be glad to hear that. If you didn't enjoy the conversation, darn, but just keep it to yourself, I guess. We will be back next week. The one host who is not here will be back next week to discuss highlighting work-sponsored paths to education. They'll be doing some profiles of students who were admitted to Ivies in recent memory. So it'll help you to get a sense of the students that get into Ivies. And then we'll have a segment on qualifications for in-state tuition. So we're here every week, whether we're talking about books or bringing you great advice in college admissions and college finance. We're excited to have you as listeners. Sally, Shannon, thanks for doing the extra credit and being here to discuss today. It was a lot of fun. And we'll see you all next week.